What if the person you belittled for knowing less than you ended up changing more lives than you ever would? This is not just the story of a waitress. This is the story of a storm hidden behind silence, of a dream buried under daily survival, until one moment shattered the quiet and everything changed. Willigate Bistro was the kind of place where chandeliers whispered elegance and every wine bottle had a story. Tucked in the heart of Manhattan's Upper East Side, it drew the type of clientele who measured worth in black cards and bespoke suits. But behind its velvet curtains and dollar Barsha wall entrees, the heartbeat of the place was a 26-year-old waitress named Naomi Clark. Every evening, Naomi glided between tables like poetry in motion. Her crisp white shirt was always a size too large. Her apron faded from too many washes, but her posture was upright, her eyes sharp, the kind that noticed everything and revealed nothing. She wasn't supposed to be there forever. No, Naomi had a plan. She'd scribbled it in the margins of napkins during breaks and mapped it out in an old spiral notebook with cracked edges. A non-profit, a center for children forgotten by the system, for teens like her younger brother Marcus, who had fallen through society's cracks when he needed help the most. Naomi wasn't interested in charity. She believed in transformation. But right now, transformation had to wait, because table 14 had just been seated, and at table 14 sat Dorian Vance. Dorian Vance wasn't just any billionaire. He was the billionaire, founder and CEO of Vance Tech. He was on the cover of Forbes twice by age 40 and once dubbed Silicon Valley's coldest genius. His reputation preceded him: brilliant, ruthless, impatient. He didn't believe in second chances, only second profits. He rarely dined in public, but when he did, he expected excellence, served on time, without mistakes, and certainly without opinions. When Naomi approached his table with the menu, she gave the same polite smile she gave every customer, no matter how powerful. "Good evening, sir. May I offer you our house special tonight?" Dorian didn't even look up. "I'm here for silence, not a sales pitch," he said, scrolling through his phone. There was a flicker of embarrassment, but Naomi didn't let it settle. "Understood. I'll return shortly," she said calmly, turning away. Behind her, Dorian smirked to himself. Just another server. Just another nobody. Later that evening, Dorian caught a snippet of Naomi speaking with another customer about her side work in non-profit planning. It was brief, barely a whisper, but enough to catch his attention. He chuckled, loudly, deliberately. "You're studying non-profits. That's cute," he said, finally looking up at her. Naomi blinked. "Yes, sir, in my spare time. I'm hoping to launch something in the next year." "A waitress with a business plan," he mused, shaking his head. "Let me guess. You want to save the world with a GoFundMe and a dream." The laughter at his table followed like obedient echoes. Naomi felt her stomach twist, not from shame, but from the cold familiarity of being underestimated. She straightened slightly. "No, sir. I want to change lives with strategy, compassion, and persistence. I don't need to save the world, just the ones who are falling through it." There was silence. Even Dorian's smirk faltered. He waved her away like she was static. "You're good at memorizing lines. Stick to waiting tables." Naomi said nothing more, but inside, something ancient and fierce awoke. Not rage, not pride, conviction. She'd spent her life building in the shadows. She didn't need validation, but something in his cruelty sparked a decision. She wouldn't just launch her non-profit. She would make sure the world, and people like Dorian, couldn't ignore it. Naomi wasn't born with silver spoons. She was born in a neighborhood where sirens sang more often than birds. Raised by a single dad, a janitor with calloused hands and a heart full of poetry, Naomi grew up watching him work double shifts so she could have single dreams. She remembered their Friday night tradition. Dad would bring home old discarded books from the school library. Together they'd sit on their worn couch and read about worlds that didn't exist in their zip code. He taught her two things. Kindness is a form of power. No one else defines your horizon. When he died suddenly from a heart attack, when she was just 18, Naomi took both lessons and held on like they were oxygen. She didn't go to college, she went to work. She took 3 jobs, read free business PDFs late into the night, and saved every penny she could. Not because she wanted riches, but because she had a dream to build something that outlived her struggle. By night, Naomi waited tables. By morning, she brainstormed blueprints for her non-profit, The Bridge Project. Its mission was simple: help at-risk teens transition from instability to independence. Mentorship, vocational training, therapy, support, no judgment, no red tape. She'd already mapped out her pilot program, already met with one community leader who promised space if she could raise seed money, but she needed visibility, a voice, a backer, and ironically, she now knew one. A rude, condescending billionaire who had the resources she lacked. But Naomi didn't want his money. She wanted his attention, and not because she needed his approval, but because sometimes the loudest way to shake the world is to prove wrong the people who thought you were invisible. 2 weeks after their exchange, Naomi received a notice. The building she lived in was being sold. Rent was about to triple. She had a choice: fight for crumbs or leap for her dream. She cashed out her tiny savings, called in every favor, and applied for a community pitch event, a local version of Shark Tank for non-profit founders. Winners would receive funding, press, and mentorship. There were only 5 slots. She was waitlisted at number 6. And then, fate blinked. One applicant dropped out. Naomi was in. 3 days before the pitch event, she walked into the venue early for rehearsal, and sitting there talking with the event host was Dorian Vance. Her heart skipped, not out of fear, but opportunity. He was one of the guest judges, and he had no idea who she was, but he was about to find out. The stage lights were brighter than Naomi expected. They weren't harsh, but they had a way of turning the world into a blur beyond the platform. Her heart thudded against her ribs like it was trying to escape, and for a brief second, she forgot every line of her pitch. She could feel the slight tremble in her fingers, the soft click of her heels on the hardwood floor. But then she looked down at her worn black flats, the same ones she wore every night at the bistro, and remembered why she was here. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here because someone, somewhere, was about to give up tonight. A teen without support, a girl like she once was, a boy like her brother Marcus, who'd slipped through the cracks years ago and never made it out. Naomi's voice came steady, not loud, but unmistakably clear. "Good afternoon. My name is Naomi Clark, and I'm the founder of the Bridge Project." There was a moment of stillness in the room. She had the judge's attention. Even the murmuring in the audience softened. But what she noticed most was the man sitting second from the left, dressed sharply in charcoal gray with a fountain pen poised above his notepad. Dorian Vance. He hadn't recognized her. Not yet. Naomi kept going, her voice growing with each word. "The Bridge Project exists because not everyone gets a safety net. Some of us fall and keep falling, and when we do, there's usually no one there to catch us. That's why I created a program that catches them before they hit the ground." She began to walk slowly across the stage. Every step was deliberate. Every sentence carried the weight of nights spent studying non-profit models and case studies, of mornings fighting back exhaustion before her shift, of afternoons spent at community centers listening to the very stories she now spoke of. She didn't use statistics like the others. She didn't throw around buzzwords or flashy slides. Instead, she told a story. There was a boy 16, kicked out of his home after his mother disappeared, and his stepfather refused to care for him. He couch-surfed, dropped out of school, and found a sense of family in a street gang that welcomed him with open arms. By the time someone reached him, he was facing charges and no longer believed he was worth saving. "That boy," Naomi said, softly, "was my brother. His name is Marcus. He never got the help he needed, but that doesn't mean others can't." For a few seconds, the silence in the auditorium felt sacred. No pens scribbled. No phones buzzed. Not even Dorian moved. She finished with a quiet conviction. The Bridge Project isn't a charity. It's an investment in potential, in community, in futures that deserve to be rewritten. And I'm not here asking for pity. I'm here inviting you to join me. A few people started to clap. Then more. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet. Naomi blinked back tears, stunned by the wave of applause that surged toward her. But in the middle of it all, she locked eyes with Dorian. He had put his pen down, and he was staring at Hurley, seeing her for the first time. After the pitches ended and the mingling began, Naomi stood near the back of the room, sipping water from a paper cup and wondering whether any of this would turn into something real. That's when she heard his voice. "You're full of surprises." She turned. Dorian Vance stood a few feet away. No entourage this time. No smirk. Just a carefully measured expression. I didn't recognize you up there, he admitted. You're the server from Willowgate Bistro. Naomi didn't flinch. Still am for now. He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning her face like he was trying to figure out a puzzle that had outsmarted him. I owe you an apology, he said. Back then, I spoke out of turn. You clearly know exactly what you're doing. It wasn't quite the same tone as when he mocked her before. This one had weight behind it. Not just regret, something else. A kind of unfamiliar respect. Naomi stayed quiet for a moment, then replied, I don't need an apology. I need partners. People who see value where others overlook it. There it was. She wasn't asking him for anything. She was giving him a chance to stand on the right side of something bigger than ego. He hesitated. Then, with something close to a smile, he offered her his card. Let's talk, he said. She took it, not out of excitement, but with the same calm focus she brought to every table she served. Because nothing had changed yet, not her rent, not the struggle, not the weight she carried, but everything was about to dot as she walked out into the night. The cool air rushed over her like a breath she'd been holding for years. Lights sparkled across the skyline like stars with stories of their own. She was just one person, a former waitress with a dream and a broken past. But tonight, she was also a founder. A force. And for the first time, someone who once dismissed her had seen what she'd known all along. She wasn't waiting for permission. She was building something unstoppable. I owe you an apology, he said. Back then, I spoke out of turn. You clearly know exactly what you're doing. It wasn't quite the same tone as when he mocked her before. This one had weight behind it. Not just regret, something else. A kind of unfamiliar respect. Naomi stayed quiet for a moment, then replied, I don't need an apology. I need partners. People who see value where others overlook it. There it was. She wasn't asking him for anything. She was giving him a chance to stand on the right side of something bigger than ego. He hesitated. Then, with something close to a smile, he offered her his card. Let's talk, he said. She took it, not out of excitement, but with the same calm focus she brought to every table she served. Because nothing had changed, yet not her rent, not the struggle, not the weight she carried, but everything was about to dot as she walked out into the night. The cool air rushed over her like a breath she'd been holding for years. Lights sparkled across the skyline like stars with stories of their own. She was just one person, a former waitress with a dream and a broken past. But tonight, she was also a founder, a force. And for the first time, someone who once dismissed her had seen what she'd known all along. She wasn't waiting for permission. She was building something unstoppable. The first meeting didn't take place in a high-rise boardroom or at some luxurious rooftop lounge. It happened in the back corner of a small coffee shop in Brooklyn, one of those quiet places where no one was trying to impress anyone. Naomi picked the spot intentionally. She didn't want marble floors or espresso served in gold-rimmed cups. She wanted real. She wanted grounded. She wanted Dorian Vance to see the world she was fighting for, not from the top of a skyscraper, but from the ground where most people lived. He arrived 15 minutes early. That surprised her. She had expected someone like him to be fashionably late, checking his watch and making a show of how valuable his time was. But instead, when she walked in, he was already seated at a corner table, coffee untouched, flipping through the small folder she'd dropped off 2 days earlier, her outline for the bridge project. When their eyes met, something passed between them, not recognition, not apology, but something closer to quiet curiosity. Like to people who had seen different sides of the same world and weren't sure if they spoke the same language. Thanks for meeting me, Naomi said as she sat down. I should be thanking you, Dorian replied, closing the folder. This is ... more than what I expected. Naomi didn't smile. She simply nodded. That's kind of the point. There was a long pause as the barista brought over 2 mugs of black coffee. Dorian took a sip. Naomi didn't. She just folded her hands on the table and looked at him, not with defiance, but with unshakable clarity. I'm not looking for a donation, she said. This isn't about charity. This is about partnership, investment, growth. Dorian raised an eyebrow. You sound like a founder already. I am. For the next hour, they talked. But it wasn't small talk. Naomi walked him through every step of her plan: mentorship programs, vocational training, mental health resources, transitional housing for teens, aging out of foster care. She knew where the gaps were, what had failed before, and why. She had done her homework, not just in theory, but in lived experience. Dorian asked hard questions. How would she scale? How would she measure impact? What would sustainability look like in 5 years? And Naomi answered them all, not with rehearsed lines, but with the clarity of someone who had stayed up late too many nights building answers for problems the world liked to ignore. By the time they stood to leave, the air between them had shifted. I underestimated you, Dorian said quietly. Naomi looked him straight in the eyes. That's fine, just don't underestimate the people I'm building this for. He nodded once, then handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter of intent, his commitment to fund the pilot program for 1 year, no strings attached. But what mattered more was the note he'd written on the corner of the page. Let's build something that lasts. Naomi left the coffee shop with the envelope tucked under her arm, but her focus wasn't on the money. It was on the clock. She had exactly 6 months before the program would need to launch. 6 months to turn belief into blueprints and hope into action. She didn't sleep much after that. Her apartment became a command center, papers on the floor, budget sheets taped to the wall, a notebook stacked high with outlines for volunteer roles, job training partners, counseling resources. She called in every favor she had. Sarah, the bartender from the bistro, offered to help with admin work. Miguel, the line cook, connected her with a community garden looking to partner with at-risk teens for employment. People came out of nowhere, former teachers, youth counselors, even ex-students, who remembered how Naomi had once quietly paid for their bus pass or slipped them a free sandwich on her break. Word spread, momentum built, and for the first time in years, Naomi didn't just feel like she was surviving, she was moving forward. But progress never comes without challenge. 3 weeks before the launch of the pilot, Naomi received a letter. The community center she had secured for her first group had backed out. The board had voted against the partnership, worried about liability and uncertain outcomes. It was a polite way of saying they didn't want kids with unstable pasts near their space. It felt like the floor dropped beneath her. She sat in her apartment that night, surrounded by stacks of plans and half-packed boxes of donated supplies, staring at the letter. The silence was loud. For the first time since the pitch event, doubt crept in. Maybe this was why people gave up. Not because they didn't care, but because the world pushed back in ways you couldn't always fight. But just as that thought surfaced, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Heard you lost your space. Meet me at 10th and Bay. There's something you need to see, DV. Naomi didn't respond. She just grabbed her coat and went. The address led her to a vacant brick building, tucked between a laundromat and an auto repair shop. Dorian was standing out front, hands in his coat pockets, staring up at the worn sign above the door. Used to be a rec center, he said. My team's been trying to lease it for a while. Thought maybe you'd want to take a look. Inside, the space was dusty, old, and smelled faintly of forgotten years. But it had high ceilings, strong bones, and more than enough room to start something new. Naomi turned slowly, taking it all in, and then she looked at Dorian. Why are you doing this? She asked. He shrugged. Because you were right. I used to measure people by what they had. Now I want to build something that measures who we help. Naomi didn't smile, but she stepped forward and extended her hand. Then, let's get to work. Because when the world says no, some people walk away. Others build new doors. And Naomi Clark was a builder. Asterisk. The first night in the new space was quiet. Too quiet. Naomi stood alone in the middle of the dusty gymnasium, the fluorescent lights flickering above like they were debating whether to stay on or surrender to age. She could still smell the faint echo of basketball rubber and childhood sweat from decades ago. Like the ghosts of forgotten after-school programs lingered in the air. The building felt tired, but not defeated. She ran her hand along the peeling wall near the entrance, her fingers catching on a scratch carved deep into the paint. It simply read, "Don't forget us." Naomi stopped. She traced the letters gently, then stood back and whispered, "I won't." She didn't sleep that night, not because she was overwhelmed, but because something inside her had shifted. It was the feeling just before a storm breaks. Electric, tense, inevitable. The next morning, she opened the front doors for the first time. No fanfare, no ribbon cutting. Just the sound of her old keys scraping in a rusted lockhand, the steady rhythm of footsteps behind her. Volunteers, one by one. Some familiar, some strangers who had heard whispers of the bridge project on community forums, or from social workers who were quietly rooting for her. Sarah arrived with a thermos of coffee and a backpack full of old office supplies. Miguel brought paint cans and music. An ex-teacher offered tutoring sessions, while a retired contractor volunteered to fix the leaky plumbing. Within hours, the place began to hum with life. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was. The walls needed patching. The heat worked only in half the building, and the flooring in room B creaked like it held the weight of every memory ever made there. But people showed up, and then more came, and suddenly, the building wasn't just a place, it was a beginning. The first group of teens arrived on a rainy Monday afternoon. Naomi stood by the door, greeting each one with a smile and a clipboard. There were 5 of them, quiet, unsure, carrying invisible baggage in the way. They avoided eye contact or flinched at kindness. Among them was a girl named Trinity, 17, fierce eyes, crossed arms. Silent Naomi saw herself in her immediately. When Trinity refused to speak during the first session, Naomi didn't push. When she skipped her second meeting, Naomi sent a message that simply said, "You matter. I'll be here tomorrow." By the end of the second week, Trinity was back, still guarded, still watching, but present. And that was enough. The weeks passed. Like chapters in a book Naomi didn't want to end. They painted the walls bright colors chosen by the teens. They set up a community kitchen with donated cookware. Job training classes launched in the mornings, group counseling ran in the afternoons, and every Friday ended with a shared meal cooked by the students themselves. Each meal told a story. One week it was lasagna from a boy who hadn't seen his mother in 2 years. The next, it was rice and beans from a girl who used to hide behind sarcasm but now laughed openly with her peers. The food wasn't just nourishment, it was testimony, a symbol that they were, in some small way, beginning to heal. And then came the media attention. It started with a blog post, local writer who visited and called The Bridge Project, Brooklyn's Hidden Revolution. Then a podcast picked it up. Then a regional news channel asked for an interview. Naomi wasn't sure she was ready, but she said yes anyway. She sat in front of the camera, hands folded, the same way she used to stand by table 7 at Willoughby Bistro, waiting for someone to look past the uniform and into the heart of the person standing there. "What makes the Bridge Project different?" the reporter asked. Naomi answered, without pause. "We don't ask what happened to them, we ask what's possible for them." The interview went viral. By the end of the week, they had new emails from donors, mentors, counselors, and former students who wanted to give back. The project was no longer hers alone. It was becoming a movement. But not everyone was happy. At the city council meeting that month, objections were raised. A few local businesses claimed the project would bring undesirable elements to the neighborhood. One council member subtly questioned Naomi's qualifications, asking what experience a former waitress had in leading youth rehabilitation. Naomi stood up from her seat slowly, her voice steady and deliberate. "Every night, for 5 years, I served your colleagues," she said. "I watched you toast 2 mergers and laugh at jokes I wasn't supposed to hear. I brought you meals while I studied community systems between shifts. I learned how people talk when they think they're not being watched. And in that time, I discovered something. The people most qualified to lead are often the ones who've lived the problems they're solving." She didn't wait for a response. She left the room with her head high. Outside, the teens who had come to support her were waiting. Trinity was at the front of the group, arms no longer crossed, a hand-lettered sign in her grip that read, "We are the bridge." Naomi didn't cry, not yet, but her voice cracked as she whispered, "Let's go home." That night, the rec center was filled with more laughter than usual. Music echoed through the halls, and even the ceiling seemed to sit taller, proud of the life growing within it. Naomi sat in her office after everyone had left, the lights dim, the hum of a borrowed space heater soft in the background. On her desk sat the original letter from Dorian, now framed, and beside it, a new letter, this one from a former student. No return address, just a note that read, "You gave me back my name. I won't forget." She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion tugging at her bones, but purpose holding her upright. The work was far from over, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. The storm didn't come with thunder or warning. It came with an email at first glance. It seemed ordinary, a simple subject line, "Site review, immediate attention required." But Naomi had learned to recognize the chill beneath bureaucracy. She opened it slowly, her heart already bracing for impact. The email was from the city's Office of Urban Compliance. It stated that an anonymous complaint had been filed about code violations in the building, fire hazards, insufficient exits, non-certified usage for residential programming. The language was cold, clinical, exactly the kind of red tape that had shut down places like hers before they even had a chance to breathe. She read the final line, twice. Operations must cease, pending inspection. Failure to comply may result in permanent closure. For a moment, Naomi just sat there, frozen, staring at the screen like it had personally betrayed her. The bridge project was thriving. Dozens of teens had begun showing up regularly. Trinity was mentoring to new arrivals. A local bakery had just offered to train 3 participants as apprentices. Everything was working. It was working. But progress has enemies. Naomi had always known that. The difference now was that she wasn't the only one at risk. This place wasn't just her dream anymore. It was their sanctuary, their proof that healing wasn't just an idea, but a practice. She called an emergency meeting that night. Everyone came. Staff, volunteers, students, even a few neighbors, who'd become unofficial cheerleaders of the space. Naomi stood in front of the chalkboard wall in the main room, the one where kids scribbled goals, quotes, song lyrics, and doodles during breaks, and explained the situation without sugarcoating anything. They could shut us down. We have 7 days. Double quotes, silence. Then Trinity stood up. Then we fight. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. In that moment, a 17-year-old girl who once wouldn't speak a word became a lighthouse, and everyone turned toward her light. The next morning, the center turned into a hive of movement. People sorted, organized, documented. Naomi called every contact she had, Dorian included. He didn't hesitate. Within hours, he had a structural engineer walking the site and 2 lawyers reviewing the building's lease. Miguel helped organize a volunteer team to fix minor repairs. Sarah coordinated a community petition, and within 24 hours, it had over 3,000 signatures. But it wasn't enough to fix the building. They had to fix the narrative. The truth was, someone had filed that complaint on purpose. Naomi didn't have proof yet, but she didn't need it. Change always makes someone uncomfortable, and when transformation starts at the roots, those benefiting from broken systems will do anything to stop it from blooming. Naomi decided to go public. She reached out to the same reporter who had interviewed her weeks before. This time, she brought stories, not just data. She introduced him to Michael, who had once slept in subway stations, but now was interviewing for an internship at a local tech company. She sat with Camilla, who had survived an abusive foster placement, and was now leading art therapy workshops for other girls. She shared letters from parents who said the bridge project gave their kids something school never could, belief. The piece aired on a Wednesday night. By Thursday morning, local officials were flooded with calls, not just from citizens, but from educators, doctors, even business owners who had begun mentoring through Naomi's program. Everyone wanted to know why a center doing so much good was being targeted for shutdown. And yet, the inspection still loomed. Naomi didn't sleep. The night before, she walked through the building long after the students had gone home, running her fingers over the chipped paint, the handmade signs, the photos on the bulletin board. Every detail was a story. Every corner carried a name. She whispered goodnight to the empty space like it could hear her. The inspectors arrived at 9 a.m., 3 of them. Suits, clipboards, stern expressions. Naomi greeted them politely, then stood back and let them do their job. They examined everything from exits, electrical wiring, emergency lights. One of them made notes so aggressively she could hear the pen scratching the paper like a warning bell. But Naomi didn't flinch. Instead, she did something unexpected. She asked if they'd like to speak to the students. There was a pause, an awkward, bureaucratic silence. But to her surprise, one of the inspectors nodded. She brought them into the common area, where a few students were waiting nervously. Trinity stepped forward first, shoulders back, voice strong. "This place saved my life," she said. "Not in a fairy tale kind of way, in the real way. I used to think my life was just going to end in some alley, but here, someone finally saw me." She didn't cry, neither did the inspectors. But one of them, the youngest, looked down at his clipboard and turned the page without writing anything. The inspection ended 2 hours later. No decisions were made on the spot. Naomi was told to expect a report within 48 hours. It was the longest 48 hours of her life. And then, the email came, approved for continued operation. No violations warranting closure. Recommended improvements outlined in attached report. Naomi didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just closed the laptop, walked to the community room, and said, "We're staying." The cheer that erupted shook the old building. That night, the teens stayed late. They made popcorn, watched a movie on a borrowed projector, played card games, and danced to a playlist Naomi didn't recognize but didn't care. It was the sound of survival turning into celebration. Later, as she locked up, Dorian called. "I told you," he said. "You're not just building a program, you're building a revolution." Naomi leaned her head against the cool glass of the door. "Then I better make it last. Because for every child who had been forgotten, for every voice that had been silenced, for every dream that had been told it was impossible, the bridge was standing, and it wasn't going anywhere." Asterisk. The call came just after sunrise. Naomi was standing in the kitchen of the bridge project, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee, staring out the window as the morning light crept across the concrete yard outside. It had rained the night before. The sky still wore the soft grey of memory. She wasn't expecting anything, at least not yet. The morning after a victory always feels like the quiet between breaths. But then her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something told her to. "Hello." A voice, smooth and measured, answered. Male, professional, the kind of voice that usually came with tailored suits and $1,000 watches. "Is this Naomi Blake?" "Yes, it is. My name is Carter Langston. I represent the Langston Foundation. I believe we have a mutual connection, Dorian Fields." Naomi blinked. The Langston Foundation was one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the country. They funded global education programs, medical outreach, climate initiatives, but certainly not small neighborhood projects like hers. "Yes, I know, Dorian. How can I help you?" "Actually, Ms. Blake, I believe we might be able to help each other," he explained, carefully and clearly, that Dorian had shared her story, that they had reviewed the news piece, that they'd quietly sent someone to visit the bridge just to observe, that they were moved, impressed, inspired, and that the foundation was currently seeking grassroots partnerships to support at scale. "I'd like to meet in person," Carter said. "We're considering a long-term grant, one that could expand your model to other cities." Naomi didn't breathe for a moment. Other cities, she had barely kept this one alive. But the idea took root instantly, like a match struck in the dark. If it worked here, why not elsewhere? Why not Detroit, Oakland, Louisville? She had once stood at a restaurant table and dreamed of helping just one kid not feel alone. Now there were no limits. They arranged a meeting for the following week, but Naomi didn't tell anyone right away. Not Sarah, not Miguel, not even Trinity. This wasn't about raising hopes. It was about readiness. If this was going to be real, she needed to prove they were more than a temporary miracle. They were sustainable, scalable, resilient. She spent the next 6 days preparing everything: documents, budgets, narratives. She walked through the center with a notebook, identifying improvements they still needed, areas they could grow. She updated the mission statement, tightened the curriculum, scheduled meetings with her team, not as a founder, but as a visionary. And when Carter Langston walked through the front doors the following Monday, Naomi greeted him like she had always belonged at the head of this place. He toured the building quietly, asked questions, took notes, observed everything from how the teens interacted with mentors to how they handled conflict. He sat through a workshop on emotional intelligence led by Camilla. He joined lunch prep with a few boys who were learning kitchen skills, and at the end of it all, he sat across from Naomi in her office, fingers laced, eyes steady. "You're doing more than I expected," he said. "You're not just teaching skills, you're rewriting identities." Naomi nodded, her voice calm despite the adrenaline pulsing beneath her ribs. "Because the world often tells them who they aren't. We just remind them who they are." Carter didn't smile. He simply reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the desk. Inside is a proposal, a 5-year commitment, funding, resources, an advisory team, and a roadmap to expand the bridge to 5 additional cities. Naomi stared at the folder. It wasn't just money, it was a future. "There's one condition," Carter added. "Here it comes," she thought. "The catch: you'll need to lead it. Naomi blinked. All of it, all of it. We believe in local leadership, but vision like this doesn't duplicate it, multiplies. You're the reason this works. She didn't say yes, not right away. She asked for time. After all, this wasn't a decision, it was a transformation. That night, she gathered the team. Trinity sat at the front, arms now open and confident, no longer the girl who flinched at kindness. Sarah leaned against the counter. Miguel sat cross-legged. On the floor, the rest of the core team filled the room. Naomi laid out everything, every detail, every possibility, every fear. I won't move forward unless you all believe we can grow without losing who we are. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, Trinity spoke. You always say we're building bridges. Maybe it's time we build more. And, just like that, the decision was made. The months that followed felt like riding lightning. Naomi found herself on flights to cities she had only ever visited through the lens of documentaries and news stories. She met with community leaders, visited abandoned schools, held circles with youth who reminded her of herself at every age. She built teams carefully, intentionally, choosing leaders who understood pain not as a weakness but as a credential. The Bridge Project became a model, a movement, but it never lost its heart. Naomi still returned to the original center every month. She walked the halls with the same quiet reverence, touched the wall where the words "Don't forget us" were now painted in gold above the main doorway. And she always made time for her students because that's who she'd always be. Not a CEO, not a philanthropist, but a girl who had once been seen in a moment of invisibility, and who now refused to let anyone else disappear. One afternoon, as she was leaving the center in Brooklyn, a familiar figure stepped out of a sleek, black car. Dorian. Older now, a bit grayer, still commanding, but this time, he didn't wear the armor of cynicism. He smiled as he approached her, holding out a weathered manila envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "A photo," he said, "from the restaurant, the night you brought me my last meal." There, she opened it. It was her standing at his table, tray in hand, half smile on her face, eyes carrying dreams that hadn't yet spoken out loud. "You once said you wanted to change the world," Dorian said. "Turns out, you did." Naomi looked up, the skyline behind her blazing with sunset. "No," she replied softly. "We did. And somewhere, maybe in another forgotten building, another girl was watching. Waiting. Dreaming. And thanks to Naomi, she wouldn't have to do it alone. Asterisk,